Hello, thanks for being in a new video. This time I have a full review of the Samsung Galaxy Fit3, the smart wristband from Samsung. Let's see what it is capable of doing. Let's get started. The launch price in Mexico is 999 pesos. That's approximately $59, and honestly, for a Samsung product, I find it super attractive. And next, let me show you everything you can do and not do through this bracelet for you to tell me if it is an option you are looking for or not. Honestly, within the Samsung ecosystem, it seems to be a very interesting option. It would also be interesting in the future to see a Galaxy Fit3 Pro to somehow fill the gap so large that remains between this and the Galaxy Watch 6, which seems to me that there is a very large distance in price. So it would fit perfectly within that range, a Galaxy Fit3 Pro. Hopefully Samsung takes it into account, but for now, let's know what it offers us in this model. As you can see, we are talking about a rectangular format watch. You can call it a watch or you can call it a bracelet. Personally, I'm going to call it a watch, although in Samsung's catalog it is separated from the Galaxy Watch. In this case, it does not offer us a glass with some special protection or anything like that, so it is standard in terms of resistance. But as material is premium, yes, it is going to offer us an aluminum case, which becomes very remarkable because usually in low-cost bracelets we see the plastic case. On the back cover side, we're going to find again polycarbonate without too much advanced stuff, so it's not the most advanced in comfort and contact with your skin, but I don't feel it's uncomfortable either. And on the other hand, the bands are completely silicone. They are quite soft. And in this case, they do have a nice feel to them. And as you realize, the clasp is quite simple. It doesn't offer us something very advanced. It simply has a hole so that in that part you can keep the rest of the band that is left. In this case, it offers us a single button, and don't get confused, it doesn't have a microphone. That hole there is simply the barometer. It has a weight of 36.8 grams, so it is quite light. And to finish with the design, in this case it's the silver color edition, but it's also available in gold, pink and graphite. So it seems to me that it offers us a good level of customization for us to choose the color that we like the most. By the way, I was forgetting to mention that these bands can be removed by simply pressing a button. The mechanism seems to me very fast and very good, although you could not attach traditional straps of any other watch, as they have a mechanism of Samsung itself, but you will have good accessories to buy. The screen is AMOLED 1.6 inches in its diagonal, with a resolution of 256 by 402 pixels. So we sincerely have that a good level of detail. The specific density is 297 pixels per inch, which for a device of these dimensions I think is fine. Although I honestly do not know for what reason I feel that some images or texts do not look as sharp as I would like. But maybe it's because I'm used to Samsung watches, or I don't know exactly why. In this case, Samsung doesn't provide information regarding how bright this screen can get. But believe me, it is quite high, so it has a good outdoor display. Fortunately, it has an automatic brightness sensor, which makes things a lot easier, and it's also going to have always-on display. In fact, that setting you can quickly manipulate from the quick settings part, which we'll get to in a moment. And notice that within the display settings, we'll also find the option to turn off the automatic brightness, so we have very good options. Also, with respect to the always-on display covers, it's definitely a good thing, since it notes that in this case it will have equivalent covers. That is, even if you change the cover of the main screen, it will definitely retain a similar cover in the always-on display format. Unlike other watches that change drastically from screen-on mode to always-on display mode. So, definitely that here we do see something advanced in this regard. Obviously, the always-on display face is going to change the brightness a bit in order to save a bit more power. But it does retain the same style, and that is something that is very much appreciated. Although the always-on display function is turned off by default to not consume so much energy, but you as a user can turn it on. We'll talk about power later on, so you'll know specifically all about it. But for now, let me tell you that it also has the feature to raise your wrist and have the screen turn on at that time. Or you can also tap the screen to turn it on. Although this can consume much more power, so it is turned off by default. Finally, in the display settings, you also find an option so that if you are playing music on your cell phone, it will immediately show you the multimedia controls. So, honestly, it offers very good features, not only at the hardware level, but also through software. Samsung is always an expert in this area, offering you multiple configurations. Regarding the sound, there is not much we can say since it does not integrate neither speaker nor microphone. So we will not have many options. The only thing I can tell you at the level of sound or music is that you do have control of the music of your cell phone directly on the wrist. Obviously you can modify the volume, you can also modify to go to the previous song or the next song, and of course also to start or stop playback. The operation is good and it will work with any player you have installed on your cell phone. In this case I am using it with YouTube Music, but it would also work with Spotify or any other application that plays music. It's just worth mentioning that since it doesn't have a microphone, you can't answer calls either. It doesn't have a voice assistant or anything more advanced like what we find in other Samsung watches. Now let me tell you all about what it is capable of monitoring through the Samsung Health app. As you realize, in daily activity it keeps track of your steps, as well as how long you've been active and the approximate amount of calories you've burned. In this case, you can see a little bit more information through these graphs of how your day has behaved. So I think it's very handy in that sense. It's also going to be showing you the goals that you've achieved throughout the week. And in this case, you can see a little bit more step information and some other things. It is also capable of monitoring your heart rate completely constantly. In fact, in the settings, you can set whether you want it to monitor this continuously or every so often. By default, it comes with constant monitoring, but if you want to save battery, you could set it to every 10 minutes to avoid consuming so much power. What I like is that it will also be able to notify you when your heart rate is too high or too low. And this is something that could help you prevent some things. It will also be able to monitor your sleep. In this case, specifically in the night, I ran out of battery, and that's why it wasn't able to monitor me on this night. But here I'm showing you also what it looks like on a night that it did get to monitor my sleep. I wish it could show you the history directly on the wristband. But in this case, for the history, you have to consult your cell phone. However, it is able to monitor your sleep in an advanced way, giving you the different stages so you can see that you are also sleeping. In fact, it also gives you a rating. And notice that it is also able to monitor the oxygen in your blood while you are sleeping. And it would also be able to detect snoring as well, although this in conjunction with your cell phone, since remember that the bracelet does not include a microphone. And speaking of oxygen saturation monitoring, note that in this case, this monitoring is not going to be done constantly, even though the bracelet is capable of doing so. But you need to start the measurement manually, because by default, it will only show you the oxygen saturation information that was measured during the night. So that is an important piece of information, as most other wristbands do allow automatic monitoring of this information. Another thing it is capable of monitoring is stress. As you notice, it shows a little bar where it tells you how you are doing at the moment. And it can also give you the information throughout the day. Even here, there are also the breathing exercises if you want to relax and you feel that you are very stressed. In fact, you can also set whether you want this measurement to be continuous or only manually in case you want to consume less battery. Obviously, it does not have as advanced functions as other much more expensive watches, so it does not include electrocardiogram or even the body composition scanner that we find in the most advanced Galaxy watches. But one thing I like is that it includes a good workout log. It supports multiple sports, as you realize, and you can even add other sports. So in this aspect, it seems that it does come to be considered an expert in sports monitoring. And what I like most is that even if you start monitoring, notice how it has a very advanced display. For starters, it will show you basic information about everything it is monitoring, such as how long you have been doing that exercise. In this case, cycling, it detects more or less an approximate distance and your average speed, in addition to the heart rate and the zone in which you are to burn calories or not. Note that in this case, it also has automatic pause detection. And in this case, it has noticed that I'm not really exercising. So it has paused this monitoring. But one thing I like is that you can swipe and you directly access your music control, or you also swipe the other way to stop the monitoring. But if you wanted to respond to a notification, for example, you can exit that app and go to any other area of the system, and you can easily go back to your monitoring. This is something that in bracelets I had not seen so far, and that's why I like to point out that it is available in Samsung. Let's say a kind of multitasking while you are exercising to do some other activities at the same time. In fact, each sport has certain level of settings that you can adjust so that you can perfectly have the monitoring that you are looking for. As you can see, it also includes GPS to map your routes. And in the Samsung Health settings, you will notice that it also has an automatic detection of a few activities, which comes in handy. If you turn this automatic detection off, you're going to get better battery life. But I like to keep it on so that on those occasions where you're walking, it counts as exercise as well. So that kind of feature comes in handy. In addition to this monitoring, it has an application to record the menstrual cycle. Although in this case it doesn't have any kind of temperature sensor or anything to help predict it, it just helps to keep track. This obviously in conjunction with the mobile app. And lastly, like other sensors in this case, it does not include a compass. And even though it does include the barometer, there's not really an app like to show the atmospheric pressure or anything like that. But this sensor is used in some sports if you need to measure the altitude. Now let's talk about the battery. In this case, Samsung promises 13 days of normal use. This without always on display. Consider that because if you want to have always on display activated, the power consumption is going to skyrocket completely. And it will result in you only reaching approximately 2 days. Although the charging speed is not very powerful. Although, as I'll tell you later, because of the charging power anyway, you're going to end up having to charge it every day. Unless you're willing to charge it for 2 hours every other day. But I think it's going to be more appropriate to charge it for about half an hour every day. And with that, you're going to be able to survive with always on display on. But if you turn always on display off, you can have a much longer battery life. So there is a very big difference between using always on display and not using it. If you don't have a problem with charging your wristband every day, you might be able to use always on display mode. But if not, you will have to turn it off and settle for the gesture of turning the screen on. One thing that I think could be improved is that Samsung doesn't include a power saving mode on its wristband. So if you want to consume less power, manually you have to go and configure Samsung Health parameter by parameter. To tell it not to constantly detect some things like stress or heart rate, but it would be better if simply with a single switch, you can activate this saving mode at certain times. It also doesn't include a watch-only mode for emergency moments where you know you're not going to get to charge your wristband anymore, but you want to retain access to the watch. So in other wristbands, I have seen those special low-power modes. And with respect to charging, Samsung does offer fast charging. Although like all wristbands, they don't include the charger, they just include the cable. But if you use Samsung's 25-watt charger, that's where you get the optimized experience. Although you could also connect to a power delivery charger. However, in my case, it was curious because in 15 minutes of charging, it recovered 33%, and in 30 minutes, it recovered 48%. But I say this is curious because Samsung promises that in 30 minutes, it is capable of 65%. So it is likely that this may vary depending on temperature, even ambient and other factors. But in my case, it did not get to charge as fast as Samsung promises. However, I do think it is a good initial fast charge. However, after this figure, the charging becomes much slower and finished up to 100% in 2 hours with 11 minutes in my test. That's definitely not so pleasant. I would like it to charge much faster, but at least the first part does get you power back with good speed. So on the battery, I think the ideal would be to not use always on display to have a good experience. Now let me show you the system that we have here, because it's not Wear OS. It's a system developed by Samsung, but it retains pretty much the same aesthetics of their more advanced watches. For example, let's start by showing you the watch faces that we have available. As you realize, changing them is very easy. And I must also say that the navigation in the system feels quite fluid. To change the cover art, you simply have to press and hold, and this way you can see the ones you have installed. However, there is a much larger catalog in the phone app. If you don't use Samsung, you might find it very strange that you have to install 2 apps because you need Galaxy Wearable. Although if you have a Galaxy, these apps already come installed. And also, when you link it for the first time, the detection is much easier. So the pairing when you use a Galaxy is also very good and very easy. One thing I didn't like though is that it still asks you to enable a location permission to be used all the time. It seems to me that that should already come pre-configured so that the user does not have this kind of difficulties or does not have to be authorizing absolutely everything, considering that it is an application made by Samsung installed on a Galaxy device. But out of this process of giving permissions on Galaxy devices, the configuration will be much faster and easier. And through this application, you will be able to manage several things, including the watch faces that I mentioned. And note that we have a very good variety. All these covers are free. There are different categories. In some cases, there are more covers by scrolling horizontally. In other cases, there are not. But believe me, it's a very good variety. Although there is not as such a cover art store where other developers can upload their own designs. But many Samsung designs look nice and stylish enough to me. There are of various styles, some of lesser taste, but definitely that among all these you do find, from my point of view, one that fits your style. I think it does offer a good level of variety. Although for the more demanding, it would be nice a store where you could find others of many more alternative styles, as we can find in other watches. But I definitely like the experience we have here in dials. As you can see, I keep scrolling and they are not finished. Finally, we come to the last thing on the list. But you also need to install Samsung Health if you want to check all the stats that the watch is collecting. So as I say, that's 2 apps you need to install. But fortunately, you can use a non-Samsung cell phone. In this case, as you can see, I'm using an Oppo phone. And I perfectly have access to all this information. In a moment, I'm going to tell you about the functions that are exclusive to when you are connected to a Galaxy phone. But for the moment, all the health data collection you can have on a non-Galaxy phone. Navigation on the watch will be very simple and very similar to everything to do with Samsung. By swiping from top to bottom, you access a quick settings panel that includes quite a few things. In fact, it also has Samsung modes. In this case, for example, I enabled sleep mode. And if it was connected to a Galaxy phone, it also syncs with the sleep mode on your phone. So that comes in very handy. In fact, it would also have a cinema mode that could also sync with your cell phone's cinema mode if you have a Galaxy. If you don't have a Galaxy, this mode works locally and can help you change some settings very easily. It also includes the flashlight setting. Although in this case I don't like that it immediately turns on the screen. I like that you can adjust the brightness intensity very easily, but believe me, it gets to be quite annoying that at night you try to turn on the flashlight and it immediately flashes in your face. So I think that could be improved with an update that hopefully they will send. And notice that it also has a water lock mode that can help you so that the screen doesn't perform unwanted actions when it's getting water on it, and to disable it you just press and hold the button. We also have the Do Not Disturb mode. We can turn Always on Display mode off or on, as well as manipulate whether we want it to vibrate or stop vibrating. Although curiously in this case it says mute or vibrate, but remember that it has no speaker. We can also press a button to find our cell phone, making it ring, enable airplane mode, manipulate the brightness, and those are the options. If we slide from the left to the right, we access the notifications that will appear as a list. As you notice, it is able to show the app icon as well. In this case, it is Telegram, and notice how I can also respond, although in this case only through predefined messages. So we don't have access to a keyboard because the screen is very small, and since it doesn't have a microphone, we can't dictate responses to it either. But through the cell phone, we can manage these predefined responses, so I think it's a good enough experience in notifications. When we have a notification, an orange dot will appear on the side of the screen to let you know that something is pending, but also while you are using the watch, this notification can be displayed. And as you realize, something I want to highlight is that emojis do appear, and that is something that not all bracelets have. So consider it as a strong point. In this case, it was a simple emoji, but it is also able to show emojis that are not so common. Because there are also other bracelets that do show you the most common emojis, but other strange ones simply appear with a box or with an X. So the experience when reading messages is very good. Although in the case of stickers, for example, we would not have such an advanced experience because it would only indicate that we sent a sticker. But within the smart bracelets, I think Samsung is the one that to date I have seen that has an excellent management of notifications. Unlike other manufacturers who receive notifications out of order or who receive multiple alerts when they are only receiving one message. So the behavior here is too good. And by the way, I also forgot to mention that while you cannot answer the call directly from the bracelet, note that it will be able to notify you when you are receiving a call, giving you the ability to end the call or answer with a message that you are busy or something like that. So in a way, it can become functional. So I already told you that by swiping from left to right, you access the notifications, and by swiping the other way, you access the cards, or you could also know them as widgets that can show you quick information, or you can also perform quick actions on it. So I think these widgets are very handy. Also, if you press and hold, notice that you can even edit some of them to show you some other tools, and of course you can add more cards with all the applications that this device has available. So the system seems to me to be extremely good, very intuitive, and the general navigation is basic. You press the button to go to the home screen, and by swiping from bottom to top, you access the list of applications. And whenever you want to go back one level, you can swipe from the left side to the right side, and in this way you go backwards, as you can see. In fact, the transitions and animations of the system also look very nice to me. It feels like a very nice and very fluid system despite being a low-cost wristband. In this sense, the Samsung experience is also noticeable as other bracelets have a much simpler system or with very basic animations. However, it does not offer any application to make mobile payments from the bracelet, for example, nor does it offer map navigation, although such features are usually seen in much more advanced watches. If you have connected the bracelet to a Galaxy phone, the camera shutter option will also appear. So from the wristband you can start the capture even with a timer, although you can't preview from the wristband. But it's nice to have this option. And of course the timers or alarm will also be synchronized so that in case you have alarms already set on your cell phone, you can turn them off from your bracelet and vice versa. If you do not have your cell phone connected to a Galaxy cell phone anyway, if you have access to an alarm, you can add them in this part, but they will not be synchronized with your cell phone. The same will happen with the timers, so if you can set them but with a Galaxy cell phone, the advantage is that if you start a timer from the cell phone, you can turn it off from the wristband as well. Obviously there will be the basic functions as well, such as a stopwatch, access to the calendar as well, access to the weather, access to the media player that I mentioned a moment ago, and we also have access to the calculator. Although in this case it doesn't have a tip calculator tool that we do see on some other watches. It also doesn't have access to a gallery or something similar, and something I would like is if it had Samsung's Reminders app, but it's not present, nor does it have access to SmartThings, so you wouldn't be able to turn on the lights or control your air conditioning or something similar from your watch. For that, you would necessarily need the cell phone. And finally, note that in the settings we have a security and emergency section where we can activate the emergency call by pressing the button 5 times, which in this case, instead of being an emergency call, will be a message where it will share your location to your emergency contacts, so it can be very useful, although I tell you it is turned off by default and is also able to detect when you get to have a very strong fall to automatically send an alert to your emergency contacts. Although again, this function is turned off, but it is appreciated that it is included because it is a feature that usually does not come in smart bracelets. It will also be able to notify you when the device has been disconnected from the cell phone. This can come in handy to alert you when you are forgetting your cell phone in the house, and you can also configure the behavior of the button when you press it twice if you want to go straight to an app, so you can have some shortcuts. And although it is not such an advanced device, it does offer you a lock screen in case you want it, although I insist that being a basic operation, I think there is little risk that someone gets to manipulate your bracelet, but either way you can get to have these options available. I think it is one of the most advanced bracelets of the moment, and of course if you use a Galaxy cell phone you will have the best experience with this bracelet compared to bracelets from other brands. For the moment we have reached the end of this video. If you liked it, you know you can tell us about it, and we'll see you next time.